Get people trained to be able to support themselves. You're hungry, I feed you a fish, I'm going to teach you how to fish at the same time. When you're self-sufficient, you go out and take care of your own life. Everybody understand that process? So AFDC, Aid for Families of Dependent Children, 2-year program, supplemental income. You had to get trained. You had to go out and get a job after that was done. We get to the 60s, President Lyndon Johnson creates what he calls the Great Society. He greatly expands AFDC, inaugurated many anti-poverty programs, Medicaid, food stamps, Head Start, housing programs for the poor. People, we still had pockets of resistance. People were poor. The reason AFC didn't seem to be working as intended for a small but significant number of people. AFDC was always intended as a temporary helping hand to single mothers, their children. Over time, it came to mean women whose husbands had left them, mothers who were never married, many teenagers, poor and uneducated who continued to have children out of wedlock. Eventually, then, AFDC became known as welfare dependence. It went from a temporary helping program to a way of life. So this is the stigma. And I wondered when I started the class today how many of you were caught up in the stigma that welfare is for the people who do nothing. They just sit on their butts and they do nothing. Back in the day when you had to give me a weekly essay, that's what many people said. Well, I'm tired of giving my money to people who sit on their asses and do nothing. Well, that's about 4.5%. You get FAFSA, that's government money. You get low-income housing, government money. We all get some assistance at some point or another, even if you get a rebate on your taxes.
I think the only reason why I personally don't believe that it's just a handout is I've been on government assistance, and I know people who have as well. I was a WIC baby. You know, I have friends who have children on WIC or on medical, and they're still out there busting sweat to try and
Sure.
do it.
Many of you, the first home you get, you may well get assistance from it. There's Farmers Home loan, there's government loans, and they'll give you loans, they'll pay the subsidy for it, and you get the write-off for it. First home I ever owned, it was like $439 a month. We paid $135, the government picked up the rest, and I get the interest benefit off my taxes. It was a really good deal until I sold a house. Then I had to pay them back what they had paid me for. One hand washes the other. So almost all of us, at one point or another, get aid from the government, some kind of assistance from the government. In 1996, under President Clinton, it changed. His goal was not to end welfare, but rather to end welfare dependence. Very important. Changes the name from AFDC to TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. This, in essence, ends AFDC. It supplied block grants to states and allowed them considerable freedom in setting welfare policy. There were restrictions on the length of benefits, setting a 5-year limit, so instead of 2, we're now to 5. Requiring recipients to find work within 2 years. You could still continue to get an education, get trained, but you had to be part of the system again, which is self-management and self-reliance. There are maximum limits. States are free to set shorter times for finding work. States are free to further limit the duration of time on welfare. Critics have called this too harsh, and others have said that it doesn't go far enough. They've called for the abolition of other anti-poverty programs known as transfer payments. So now we get into the nuts and bolts. You need to know AFDC, TANF, and now we're going to talk about welfare itself. Welfare is considered transfer payments. You'll see that phrase on your quiz. Transfer payments simply means transfer of wealth from one segment of population to another through taxation and dispersal. So the government does not make a product to sell, and so they reach into your pocket. And I think this past year on April 3, you were finally allowed to keep one of these you've been working for since January 1st. Now, in a libertarian society, we assume that there's a general welfare that we all want to participate in. Health, education, standing military, standing police, force, fire department, health, and education. And because the government doesn't make a product, they reach into our pockets. And in a libertarian point of view, we acquiesce to the need for taxation. We want to have standing military, police, force, fire department, health, and education. The question is always in a libertarian society, beyond that, how much is the government entitled to reach into your pocket? Because they have no product to sell, they need wealth from somewhere in order to redistribute it through society. So number one then is transfer payments. That's what taxation is. Number two, it is called redistribution of wealth. Politically, that is always targeted for lazy people who do nothing. Everybody benefits. If the weakest link in the chain is strengthened, then the whole chain is strengthened. If the weakest link breaks, the chain is useless. So even if you get very little directly, if the chain is strengthened, from a utilitarian point of view, we figure we're better off. We don't want people to be homeless, but they ought to go for work. So you see a lot of homelessness now. There's a solution for that. You can give people a helping hand. Would you like to work? There's more than enough jobs to do. I was in a city up in northern Michigan 4 years ago, 1,600 summer jobs, unfulfilled, but they had a homeless problem. Now I'm not harping on homelessness. I'm just saying, if you can stand on your feet and you can work, then maybe you ought to do a little work. And we'll supplement your income, and we'll also pay extra to make sure that you stay healthy and you stay off the street. We don't want people just dying on the streets. This is not Calcutta where people die on the streets. It takes days to find them. Good.
Problem with a lot of welfare programs for homeless people is they don't want to stay clean.
They don't want to.
They don't want to stay clean.
Well, that's
not.
sure. That's part of the program. Don't forget, in a libertarian society, and we'll get to that on Wednesday, people have a right to do whatever they want to do as long as what they do doesn't interfere with someone else. If you want to do drugs, go do drugs. I mean, you know. Or go to the Netherlands and they'll pay you for doing drugs and whatever. But we're free to set the standards for it here. So transfer payments is taxation that redistributes wealth throughout society where we hope there's an intended need. Everybody follow that? Okay. Very important. These payments always come in the form of cash benefits. So if you're a dinosaur and you do your taxes and you mail it in and they send you back a check, what do you do with your check if you want to have money to spend? You take it to the bank and you give the piece of paper, the check, to the teller, and the teller gives you back cash. So a check is really a cash benefit. Or if you're the modern age, you electronically file your taxes and suddenly you look in your bank account and you notice there's more cash in your account. If you get low-income housing, you pay less out of your pocket for housing, which means you have more cash in your pocket. Everything is cash benefit when it comes to transfer payments. Even if you get a check, even if you get a voucher, it always comes out, it always comes out as cash. Everybody understand that? Always comes in the form of cash benefits. If you get a voucher, it means less money out of your pocket, you have more cash, more disposable income. Always cash benefits. If I said that 3 times now, always cash benefits. These come as earned income tax credits, generous tax refunds to the working poor. In other words, you give the government less tax money, which means you have more cash in your pocket to spend. Supplemental Social Security income, other services come in the form of Medicaid. You don't have to pay necessarily for medical services. Community health centers, low-rent public housing, food stamps, school lunch programs, job training, etc., etc. They're all over the place. Everybody gets a little bit of help, and it always comes in the form of cash benefits. TANF continues providing cash benefits while requiring participation in work-first programs and limiting participation to 5 years. Benefits include child care expenses, education costs, job training, transportation, housing vouchers, food stamps. Medicaid is also available to those families that were eligible under AFDC. Some subsidies are provided to employees who hire persons in TANF. It goes right across the board. Some of you may be hired for a job and you don't know that the employer is paying half your salary and the government is paying the other half to get you trained so you can finally take care of yourself without any government assistance. I used to do that when I had my computer business. The government would help me out with it and I'd hire someone, and if they became good enough, I'd hire them full-time, or they'd go out and they'd do their own business. Okay. Under the Great Depression, compassion and social stability fueled a great reform. People looked to the federal government for help. The Great Debate, it expanded the role of government greatly. In a libertarian society, we try and minimize the role of government. When we have calamity and society is pressured and maybe even at great risk, our tendency has been to expand the government's role in our lives. Gave us regulations on industry, banking, social welfare programs, charges that involved the rights of people being violated. The New Deal amounted, many people said, to creeping socialism. Socialism is the government's involvement in your way of life. Now, how many of you would like to reject any assistance? Minimum wage laws. That's the government involved in your life. We'll get to that when we talk about socialism. Many of us need the benefit. Do any of you do much flying ever? You do driving. It's nice to have roads that aren't in Michigan. Don't go to Michigan. Everybody I meet from Michigan just complains. I mean, they have potholes that are the size of our sinkholes, and no one thinks to fill them up. When you go flying, it's nice to know that the airline is regulated in terms of safety. Truckers are regulated in terms of safety. It's things like that. So the government gets involved. The question always in a libertarian society is how much involvement do we want the government to have in our lives? And everybody says less. And when they start withdrawing the benefits that we get that we don't know we get because it's done behind the scenes, then suddenly we realize that the benefits that we've been receiving and paying taxes for and complaining about having to pay taxes for, suddenly, well, maybe we do want those benefits after all. It is costly. By the way, standing military, police force, fire department, health and education, they're not working for free any more than you want to work for free. So those services have to be paid for.
And I'll make the point that this college wouldn't be what it is if there wasn't the government assistance. Our tuition wouldn't be as low as it is. You wouldn't be sitting there. And people don't realize the involvement that impact that makes.
So all that being said, by the way, I posted this for you just to look at. This is the progression of the Great Depression to what they called the Great Recession. This last time it was really the Little Depression. In 1933, we passed the Glass-Steagall Act. By 1938, the government got into the mortgage business. 25% of people lost everything they had. So we invent Fannie Mae. The government will back your mortgages so that if banks back the mortgages, they're protected. 1996, we have the National Affordable Housing Act called HUD. That's when we decided everybody should participate in the American dream to have housing if you could. 1970, to make sure we backed it up with money, we invented Freddie Mac. Those are both government mortgage companies, both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. In 1999, we repealed the Glass-Steagall Act, and in 2000, a year later, we rescinded what's called the Commodity Futures Modernization Act. So it's known that housing goes up on average, homes in value go up on average 3% a year. So over a 10-year period, it should go up 30%. So banks then will sell your mortgage to companies that are willing to take a risk on the fact that the houses continue to go up. If they go up and the banks, maybe the housing goes up 4 or 5%, then the people who bought your mortgage, they make a nice little profit. So the bank said, well, we have a great idea. What if we bundle mortgages and we'll sell 10 at a time? Or what if we sell 100 at a time? Or what if we sell 1,000 at a time? When you do that and you're making 2% or 3%, but it's times 3,000 or 5,000 or 10,000, you're making a boatload of money. And when that happened, the market thought, oh wow, we can start making money. We can start making money. And so everybody was into buying bundled mortgages. And that worked until it ran out of steam again, and then you have a $110,000 house that's selling for $250,000, and the market said we can't support that anymore. And that's what caused the market to crash. The repeal of the Glass-Steagall and the commodity meant you couldn't make what we call exotic packages for people. By the way, this still is not reenacted, which means you're still subject to commercial banking as well as investment.